we first started hearing about these Asian hornets, aka the murder hornets, back in December of 2019, this past December. That was the very first reported sighting in Washington state. Since then, there's only been two more reported sightings, I believe. All of the insects that were found were dead. Nonetheless, it still has a lot of people concerned. Are they a threat to the bee population here in the United States? More importantly, could they kill human beings? What kind of effect could they have on the honeybee population, more specifically here in Georgia? So to kind of put everybody's mind at ease, we sought out the expertise of Keith Delaplane, who is a professor at the University of Georgia, also the director of the honeybee program there. I was able to do a Zoom interview with Keith, and he was able to kind of dispel some of the myths that are out there about these Asian hornets. Well, Keith, I can't thank you enough for joining the Farm Monitor. Is there any fear at this moment that they could arrive here in Georgia? Do they pose any threat to Georgia residents?
Short answer is no. In fact, Ray, before our interview, I Google mapped the distance between Atlanta and Custer, Washington, and it's over 2,700 miles. So this is not an acute danger by any stretch.
And you look at some of the video of these hornets in action, and I can understand why people are worried, especially beekeepers, because these things really, they go into these honeybee hives and they brutally, and I mean brutally, destroy these honeybees. Is there anything that honeybee keepers can do, maybe in the future, if these things arrive?
Yeah, and I think this is a good moment to mention a lot of your listeners have probably heard these hornets described as murder hornets. And I think it's important to set straight that that term was coined by Japanese researchers in the context of honeybees, not humans. So I do want to emphasize that this is more of a beekeeper problem, I think, than a general public concern. But for the beekeepers, that name is fairly well earned because they really are bad on honeybees. They're native to Southeast Asia, where honeybees are native, and they're just very good at picking them out of the air. And they butcher the bees. A hornet will capture a bee on the wing, then they will decapitate it, take off its wings, its legs, its abdomen, and take home only the thorax, which contains most of the muscle and protein. So as far as prevention for beekeepers, there are a variety of homemade trap designs that beekeepers try to catch adults with fermenting fruit juices and alcohol, for example. These can be effective, but it often boils down to the hard work of tracking a hornet back to its nest. And it's a lot of work. I've sometimes seen beekeepers in Europe, which have other species of hornets, resort to fly swatters.
Yeah.
And they will literally go out and swat the hornets that they see in their apiaries. So this is certainly something that Georgia beekeepers do not want, do not need. Of course, we've had a string of problems with honeybee health for over a decade now, and this is kind of one final insult on top of injury.
And I know there's really no way to interview one of these Asian hornets to find out what their mindset is, but do we know, Keith, why they target these honeybees? Is there a motive behind them? I mean, has there been enough studies on it to figure out why they attack these hives?
Well, let's distinguish between the honeybee that you and I know, which is a European species, as opposed to the honeybees that live in Asia. The honeybees in Asia have some defensive mechanisms against this hornet. The Asian honeybees will mob an attacking hornet, and they elevate their thoracic temperatures by vibrating their wings, and they can actually kill the thing by cooking it.
Wow.
Now, the European honeybees that we have here in Georgia and throughout the United does not have that behavior. So they are sitting ducks, as you may say, and totally vulnerable to these hornets. So it is a bit unfortunate that the most commercially important honeybee has no natural defenses against this hornet.
I think what's interesting too, when I was researching these Asian hornets, one thing that stood out to me is that these colonies can produce multiple queens. I'm no bee expert by any stretch of the imagination. Is that the norm when you're talking bee colonies, or is that pretty much unique to these Asian hornets?
This is a reproductive pattern that's fairly typical across wasps. What you have is a colony that is only active during summertime. They start as individual queens in spring, and they spend their whole summer just building up a workforce of workers who then in turn produce more queens and males at the end of the season. So an average colony of wasps, even some of our native wasps, may produce queens in the neighborhood of 100. But the likelihood of any of those individuals surviving winter and successfully founding a new nest the next year is quite small. I think in the case of the Asian hornet, it's only about 30% of them that overwinter, and even a smaller number that actually produce a successful colony. So their reproductive rate is fairly typical for other wasps in their group.
Yeah. Well, Keith, we appreciate your time. And if these things ever do arrive here in Georgia and become a major threat here, you can rest assured we'll be reaching back out to you.
Be happy to do so, right?
All right, Keith, thanks so much.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.